So welcome everybody to the first Cloud Cafe of 2022. Can you believe it? I'm Jenny Smith and I chair the Cloud Cafe sessions on behalf of Stroud District Green Party. Today we've got a absolutely fantastic lineup for you to talk about something that I think is very close to the Stroud, the heart of Stroud. It's both art and action, art in action and action in art. So how do people use art in different ways to express themselves, and how do they use it in ways to raise awareness of different subjects that are important to them and close to their hearts, in a way that means people can connect with the issue and also understand a bit more in a way that is meaningful to them. So I think, sorry, I've just lost my page. I think what we'll do now is go straight to the speakers because they're going to have a lot more to say about this than me. Hi everybody who's just joining. We will start with the speakers, so if everybody could turn their cameras off, that would be great. We will bring you back at the end of the session. Okay, so I'll do a short intro of all of our speakers as we introduce them. So our first speaker is KATHARINA Child, who's a local Green Party member in Stroud and the environmental lead at a local company, and also runs Atelier, which is a community space for art and lots of different things and workshops. And I know I always see them popping up and I always think how wonderful it would be to be there, especially the mend and make that you do with clothes, which I think is a wonderful initiative. So let me introduce KATHARINA and you tell us more about the projects that you're working on and how people can connect with it.
I am sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just, in the middle of this, my other computer, thank God I had two, basically is stalling. So I just jumped into my laptop here, so sorry if I look a little bit like looking in both directions. And you might even be able to see me from two different directions, but I don't know what I've done with the other one, but let's forget about that and let's get started. I also have my slides here, thank God. Okay, fantastic. I'm just going to try to share now. I hope it will still allow me to share, even though I would probably another, what do you call it? I'm probably another user now. So just give me a second. I am almost there. I am here, yeah.
No problem, that's fine. I can see while we're waiting that Stroud District Green Party have already added the link to Atelier Stroud, so people can take a look at that as well.
I'm sorry, just a second here. I'm just slightly, I had it all set up, guys. I'm really sorry.
Don't worry, it wouldn't be a Cloud Cafe if we didn't have some technical difficulties. Don't worry at all, it's absolutely fine.
So, okay, I'm trying to share now, so just give me, yeah, here we are.
Okay, perfect, we can see
that. Does that work? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, hello, my name is KATHARINA Child. I run Atelier and work with various people, artists and makers, and we very often have an agenda that reaches beyond that physical focus of what we normally do around making, primarily making, and that's what I want to sort of talk about today. So very often we also feel like we want to comment on or respond to what's happening in the world we live in, and it sort of feels like it's difficult not to, especially in the situation we are in right now. So I was thinking quite a lot about sort of how can I start out? It feels like it's such an obvious thing. Of course, creativity and art and crafts is extremely important in this conversation about talking about change in society on all different levels. So I was thinking, what has inspired me over the last sort of years. And one person who came to my mind was this American lady, Elinor Ostrom, defender of the commons. She's maybe not the most obvious choice from my perspective from arts and craft, but she has been over the last few years giving me a lot of thoughts around why does it feel relevant, and maybe for some of us even necessary to use art and craft when we communicate or want to sort of react to the situation. Elena is an economist, or she was an economist. She died in 2012. She's also a Nobel Prize winner, one of the few female ones, especially within economics. She is known for her work around the economical principles around the tragedy of the commons, but has given it this sort of positive twist or hopeful twist, talking about that normally there's quite a pessimistic idea around the tragedy of the commons. Many of you probably already know the ideas behind it, but it's basically this idea that the individuals neglect the well-being of society in this pursuit of the personal gain. This idea that we are inherited selfish individuals, and when we come together in collective situations, we end up depleting the resources or the situation because we can't work together, basically. The really inspiring and I think quite hopeful thoughts that came from Elena was that her research was showing that actually in practical situations, humans can actually avoid this tragedy, but it does require that we have a personal, intimate connection to land and resources, which was very much her focus. And that has very much given me that kind of inspiration to how do we sort of tackle complex resource issues or generally complex issues. And I feel that she has definitely given me sort of this idea that making it personal, relevant, and in my case, very often tangible.
Recording in progress.
Sorry, that was my computer next to me. Making things personal. Oh God, I'm sorry. I don't know whether I can turn this up.
Don't worry, that's totally fine.
Oh no, I can't. It doesn't react to anything I do. It's quite sad.
Okay, Stroud District Greens, can we?
No, I'm just going into another room. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, we can. It sounds like it all planned part of the sort of creative.
Don't worry, I'm in another room.
I see you here. Actually, let me try and.
Okay, so what I wanted to say was that for me, she gives us that sort of idea that things we make personal, things we make sort of tangible, actually gives us a good understanding of our problems, and also gives us a better position to come up with good strategies and solutions for these problems. So that's maybe quite abstract, but for somehow she has given me these ideas that actually there is almost like a philosophical idea of why it's important to go back and have that physical meeting with in my case very often textiles, but all kinds of different mediums. So one thing I also just wanted to mention that also inspired me over the last few years is Richard Sennett's idea of the craftsmanship, and this idea that it also becomes this inherent thing for humans that when we start using our hands, when we start making things, we almost have that automatic desire to do a good job just for its own sake. And I think that's also another really important thing to remember around when we start being creative, that very often that process puts us in the right frame of mind. So to take it back to more about what we're doing at Atelier and what the different things we've been doing over the last few years, hopefully inspires these kind of thoughts and activities. So over the last few years, we've done, as Jenny mentioned, we run a weekly craft club where we ask people to come in and work with their hands, work with textiles, or work with whatever they want to in our space, and share those ideas and share the skills with other people. We have our monthly repair cafe where we engage with people around how can we make the broken unbroken, how can we make, maybe even enhance the broken things from their previous stage. We, again, similar in that way, we ask people to come together to understand how you fix clothes, but also through that, how do you actually create items? And with that understanding and that knowledge, also gives people an understanding what kind of resources actually put into creating items that we take for granted or we rely on a daily basis. Many workshops also gives us, or many activities gives us a very direct link back to the natural world. There's an example of a plant dye workshop, but also weaving that makes people connect to wool, potentially from a local farmer. And it also makes people start asking the question, so where is this thing from that I'm holding in my hands? Where did it come from? How was it created? And how can I turn it? What kind of activities do I need to put into it to make it something else and make it something useful? The other activities we've had that sort of are maybe starting the conversation, being inspired by many of these activities, is we were part together with the Stroud Valley Art Space, creating conversations very similar to the one we have today. We had the culture reset sessions. We've also had more sort of one-off things, wikithons, where we try to collect people's knowledge and share that knowledge with the global community of Wikipedia, but also with the local community of Stroud. We also run creative community sessions where we very much talked about the health and the well-being of the local community and how a creative focus support that. And I've just linked a few funny, lovely photos, hopefully, of happy people doing their things. You can see people learning to use the sewing machines for the first time, and more advanced workshops like teddy bear workshops. People weaving their own cloth, and then in this lovely photo where people are trying to dye with the leaves. Just at the end of my little session here, I wanted to just mention a new project that we are going to get involved in. It's part of a bigger project called Walk for Earth. It's a project run by an activist called Zoe Bisha. She's based in Oxford, and she has a plan of walking from our area up to Loch Lomond in Scotland, also the birth town of Polly Higgins. It's a project that started before Polly died, and was very much an idea of making that journey and having conversations along the way, promoting the idea of the ecocide law, but also having that general, sometimes uncomfortable conversation about the situation we are in. Alongside that, or within that Walk the Earth project, there's the Interwoven project. Oh, there's a photo, by the way, of the mule Falco and Zoe. One day, within, I think not too long, she and he will even come to Stroud, and if anybody wants, they can come and say hello before they go on their epic walk. But Interwoven, I just wanted to mention that as a really nice example. Interwoven, which is part of the Walk for Earth, is a project where we are trying to engage the energy and creativity of people along the route. And the idea is that it's a collective textile project that connects people around the textile making. In practical terms, it involves weavers, it involves plant dyers, and it involves bigger community groups. And the project is where we're going to create a big cloth at the end of the project that will be gifted to the ambassador of Vanuatu, which is the South Pacific Ocean nation, also, as many of you probably know, listed as the most climate vulnerable island in the world. And this gift is very much the idea that it's also, and the other thing important with that ocean nation is they made the first stand in December 2019 at the International Criminal Court, where they were the first to propose the serious conservation of ecocide law on the international stage. So this is again a project where we try to connect local people with the making, but hopefully putting them in connection with another local people on the other side of the world and have this conversation about the situation we are in. That's me. That's 11 minutes and 16 seconds. So it's not too bad with a little bit of stuff. Yeah, we're based in Lower Street in Stroud. And if any of you are interested or and excited about the Interwoven project, we're looking for plant dyers, weavers, and people for the community groups. So please contact us and we will connect you to the right people. So yeah, that's all for me.
Thank you so much, Katharina, and thank you for kicking us off today, and also for absolutely keeping you cool in a situation, in a technical difficulty situation. But I think it was a beautiful way to start the session. I think you touched on so many key points that are really going to resonate throughout the whole of today's session around, creativity, but how it can also teach skills, how it can create a sense of community and build community, and also build friendships. I think we take for granted like the possibilities and opportunities to make friends as adults, and I think that these kinds of places really create those kinds of feelings, which is a really beautiful thing in a world that is so disconnected, and especially post-COVID, in a world where none of us can remember how to socialize. I think it's a really important and beautiful thing. So thanks. And then also really appreciated you sharing like your inspiration as well. I think that was something that was really important, and how art can inspire activism and activism can inspire art. And I think that yeah, it was a really fantastic presentation, and I really appreciate you joining us today. And I'm sure that people will get started with the questions very soon, so keep an eye on the chat as well. So our second speaker today is Sarah NICOLLS, and she is a multi-talented woman that is joining us today. So a pianist, a composer, and an inventor of the inside-out piano, which enables her to play the strings and the keys, creating layers of textured sound. She has 2 new shows that were both collaborations, and in 2020 she toured her work 12 years, which used real interviews, speeches, and headlines from intergovernmental panel on climate change, which I find absolutely fascinating, and I'm very excited to hear about. She composes all her own music. She has an occasional podcast, which sounds very interesting, and I hope she touches on, and is a prominent soloist with a whole host of accolades that I'm sure she will tell us about. So Sarah, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Hi everybody, how are you all doing? Right, here I go on the screen share. Let's go slideshow. Okay, so I'm going to whiz through these because 10 minutes is a healthy, finite amount of time. So yeah, for me it's all about the climate emergency. And I thought I'd better start by showing you who I am, what I do. This is the piano I've invented. In short, it's so I can play the strings as well as the keys more easily. By the way, I assume you can see my slides, right, Jenny? Yeah, good. I call it the inside out piano. It's just a lot of fun to play, and it is the only one in the world. So it's in Stroud. There you are. What's the opportunity of art for action? So for me, it's all about telling stories, getting people feeling stuff, getting audiences talking, thinking more. And my favorite ever piece of feedback from the first climate piece I did was, instead of just thinking about or reading about climate change, I actually felt it. And for me, that was like, yes, the job is done. So it's also about raising awareness. And again, a couple of bits of feedback here. The performance neither assumed any great expertise of the audience nor patronized them, instead presenting issues with an openness and honesty. So that's very much my tip. Try and just be quite straightforward. And somebody else said that they are much closer to the issue now, maybe so close that I'm actually in the issue, which I just thought was a very interesting thing to say. So initiating change as well. How can we go from art to action? oh, won't let me, there we go. So what motivates me? Well, the first word is fear, because I did read the IPCC report and basically thought, crikey, that is a severe deadline. And my awareness building from that, just trying to understand the big picture. That's what motivates me. A desire for our collective path to stop hurtling towards destruction. I really like connecting with people. I really like to reach across. I am optimistic, so I like to be cheerful about stuff, very practical. I've written normal, I guess, just getting on with things. But equally, I want to use my professional skills to have the most impact. So this was the first piece that I did. It was called 12 Years, which was literally how long the IPCC gave us to halve emissions. Now, technically, it's if you still went on the same maths, it's 8 years, but I think it's more like 6 because emissions are still going up. So there's me with my wildfire picture, which was the kind of plug for the show. My first bit of inspiration was Survival Condo, which is a bunker that you can buy in America for like, I don't know, $1 million. And the idea is that you could be very safe in there from all sorts of stuff. And one of the characters in my piece even says, you know, you could be safe in there from nuclear war, so just don't worry about anything. And it just seemed like such a bizarre idea to me to hide. Just hiding seemed like a wrong way to go. So I sort of obsessively started thinking about who are these people that want to buy the bunker to live in. Obviously, the IPCC report, which you'll all be very familiar with. It's really good to read it again, even though it's now 4 years ago, which is terrifying. Extinction Rebellion, 2018. I mean, everything was going on in 2018. And then also the other things, I'm going to play a couple of tracks, some more inspiration for me for the show. So this is real survivors trying to get out of a wildfire.
It's okay, Mama. Oh, God. Please try, just please try. Oh, I'm fine.
So that is a sample of 2 ladies who are trying to drive out of the wildfire that was in Paradise in California. And the track is kind of like the core of the 12 Years piece. For me, it was really important to be kind of quite violent in a way, because it seems to me that we're quite insulated, really, from a lot of the worst attributes of the climate breakdown. And so to bring that kind of visceral feeling to the audience. So that's the kind of the scariest track, as it were. And then this is towards the end, the penultimate track. And I got permission from Greta Thunberg to use her speeches. And because I had to keep updating the piece, the last time I played it was in 2021. I kept adding later speeches of Greta's, and what was amazing to me was the change in the tone of her voice. So here's a little extract towards the end of this track.
We do need hope. Of course we do. But the one thing we need more than hope is action. Once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So instead of looking for hope, look for action. Then, and only then, hope will come. The eyes of all future generations are upon you.
So the whole piece was basically 12 movements, and this is the program. So there's various other people, real people, that feature in it. David Wallace Wells is being interviewed. He's the author of The Uninhabitable Earth. And Bin Bin Wong is on a COP24 panel. And at the end of the piece, I really, really wanted, instead of just like letting the audience walk out, I really wanted to have a conversation. And so at the bottom of the page, I said, well, what can you try? Ways to become part of the solution. Because it seemed to me like always Greta is totally on the money. And, you know, there's no point just being hopeful. It's all about acting. It's all about action. And so this PTO after the gig basically wanted to kind of, you know, good art raises questions, but I kind of also wanted to get into the answers. And I had this page of like lifestyle actions that you might take, but they sort of get more and more radical as you go down the page. And, you know, there's suggestions about activism and how you spend your money and what you might do. For me, it was really important to introduce experts at that stage of the show. So I performed the piece for, you know, the first hour, and then straight afterwards we'd have a Q&A, and these were some of the people who I was very lucky to work with, and most of them are on the Musical Activist podcast, so you can go and listen there if you just search The Musical Activist. But it really meant that when audiences had questions, that somebody who really knew their stuff could answer. And it was absolutely brilliant. One of the most incredible moments was when there was this 90-year-old Extinction Rebellion protester talking, and then Richard Betts, who's the head of Climate Impact, who's literally the man that writes the UK risk assessment for climate change. And he had been called as a sort of expert witness. And just the discussion that could happen between them about action and activism was kind of amazing to listen to. So this is some of the audience. Online, of course. This is just a slide to kind of say, what are your regular conversations? Because it feels to me like that's the way to keep going, just keep talking. And then I was asked also to just tell you what I do in my day-to-day. So at the minute, I'm basically a beginner farmer, and this is where I am sitting currently. And on the left is all the things that I'm trying to do, as well as my art. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was so impressive. So many things to say on what you have brought to the table there. I think first, like, everybody get in the chat and answer the questions that she's asked you. So get some ideas on how we can take art to activism. Let us know what you're doing as well. But I think, you know, what you're doing is fantastic. I love your honesty on fear being a motivator for your art. I think that's a beautiful thing. And your ability to move people with like bringing these very harsh reality of interviews and speeches into something that people connect very easily with in music. I think, you know, that's a really wonderful thing. I think what you're saying right at the end around activism and like, so at my work, I work for the European Green Party, and at the minute we're talking about actionism. So like how everyone is in this state of activism now, and we're, well, not everybody, you know, that would be an ideal world, but not everybody, but we're engaged, we want to change, but how do we change things, and bringing these huge policy ideas on very complex issues into something that people can break down to a day-to-day, just stop doing this or start doing this or change a little bit of this, I think is really powerful. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing. And again, I'm sure there will be things to look at in the Q&A a little bit later on, but really appreciated.
Cool. And I will just pop my website in the chat as well. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. And I think the podcast is already in there somewhere. I've just seen it pop up. So thank you very much. Okay, so our third speaker is Emily Joy. Emily is a socially engaged artist and researcher whose current work reflects environmental concerns. The projects include the ongoing Arts Council funded Land, Earth and Empathy, which explored ways of working collaboratively and exploring shared viewpoints and the possibility of growing empathy, which I think is a vital part of what we need to change, or what we need for change. We need more empathy in the world if we're gonna bring everyone on this journey to change what is happening. But yes, I'll let you talk, Emily, and please have your section now, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. If you let me know whether you can see this. Is that coming up okay for you? Great. So I'm Emily. I'm an artist based in Stroud. Some of you may know me already. I am a sculptor. I'm also an installation artist, and I work with all sorts of different materials. At the core of what I want to talk about today is also at the core of my practice, which is the question, what role do artists play in an environmental crisis? And it's something I've been really asking myself in the last couple of years, because since maybe 2017, 2018, I've been really aware that the environmental crisis, ecological breakdown, all of the sort of social issues around that have become more and more important in my practice. They've always been really important in my life, but maybe not so central to my practice. So I've got this this quote to start with from Andreas Malm and Alf Hornborg. They say that scientists are not necessarily well equipped to study the things that take place between humans and also between them and the rest of nature. The composition of a rock or the pattern of a jet stream is rather different from such phenomena as worldviews, property and power. So I want to give you a little bit of an introduction into my practice, and then just work through, I suppose, the different levels and how I got to these questions that I'm asking at the moment. So for a while, I've been looking at the work of memory and imagination and loss, personal loss, through my practice. And recently, more and more, the kind of action of retracing. So whether that's retracing through memory or through an actual journey. So a few years ago, I started working with a collection of slides, and one of them you can see here. They are photographs from a journey that my father made in 1972, and he walked and drove through the Swiss Alps and took photographs of some of the mountains and the glaciers. This is the Morteratsch Glacier. You can just see the base of it on the bottom left of the picture. And what struck me looking through these slides, which have now become the kind of basis of my practice, is comparing them to current images taken from the same viewpoint. The ecological change and imbalance is really, really visible. So the glacier has retracted, has melted, and the trees have grown. And actually, if you walk along the Morteratsch Glacier now, some of you may have done that, they have these signposts along the way with images from 100 years, 150 years ago, showing where the glacier was at each point. And there's one here from 1970, where the glacier was at that point. So there's a very, very interesting kind of visual layering going on. And I started to wonder how, starting off at this very personal point of loss, how the ecological loss can be mirrored through that, and how they can run in parallel. So the key things in my practice are developing visual metaphors through materials, discussion, collaboration, working with other people, and always asking questions. I'm currently at the beginning of a 9-month period of funded research and making. So I was lucky enough to get some Arts Council funding for this period, which is an amazing gift, and it enables me to work with a group of mentors. So the first mentor is somebody I've worked with over a few years, anthropologist and artist Elizabeth Hodson. She's based up in Edinburgh. And she's fascinating because she has this sort of viewpoint that straddles the scientific world of anthropology and then the arts world through her own practice. The second mentor is a glaciologist called Jörg Allian, and he's based in Zurich, and he's helping me with the practical side of things, I suppose the kind of hard facts through his research. He's now retired. And also through his view of, from a very direct personal view of the glaciers melting all over the world in his work from the 1960s, 70s onwards. And then the third person that I'm working with, the third mentor, is Dugald Hein, who is one of the co-founders of the Dark Mountain Project. And he comes at this whole discussion from a very interesting philosophical viewpoint. I'll come back to that in a bit, but what you're looking at the moment is images of glaciers that are melting, they're retreating, and they're covered in glacial fleece, which is microfiber fleece treated with a kind of lubricant to make them waterproof, and they have tarpaulins over the top. I'll show you the next slide is the Rhone Glacier, and at the, I don't know if you can see my little mouse moving, at the bottom you can see there's a patch which is covered in these glacial fleeces. And the Rhone Glacier has suffered a huge loss of mass. So one of these solutions is to cover the glaciers with fleece, with plastic fleece, which seems to me enormously absurd. And there's the practicality of it. There's the environmental impact, so it's pretty horrific. The tarpaulins often don't get removed, so they're washed down into the glacial lake and become part of the sediment in the lake each year, and then they're replaced. And this is to preserve a tourist attraction, Ice Grotto, which is carved into the glacier each year. And it just struck me as such a potent visual metaphor for how we're approaching this. This is so obviously a sticking plaster, a tiny little sticking plaster on this great big gaping wound of ecological destruction. And it's actually really perverse. This is a close-up of the entrance to the Ice Grotto, and there's a lot of rubbish left. There's a lot of kind of incidental litter that also just gets washed down. And the other proposed solution, or not solution at all, but way of protecting or preserving the retreating glaciers is to use man-made, human-made snow, which obviously uses a huge amount of water, which has ecological problems, and also uses energy. These ideas, the absurdity, the drive, the human drive to protect or preserve something whilst kind of ignoring the bigger picture really, really interests me. And that's really why I'm looking at the moment through my practice. But the visuality of these white sheets of tarpaulin, of fleece, covering a glacier or covering parts of a mountain have really stuck with my practice. And you can see some images here, sketches and small work using the idea of layering, covering, obscuring, erasing, all of these different ideas, mark making. So through my work, there's this personal journey. So I'm retracing, at some point this year, I'll be retracing the journey that my father made back in '72, and physically experiencing that for myself, and taking images and comparing the change in the ecosystem. There's a sense of balance, of imbalance, and then there's these absurd solutions to protecting the glaciers. In terms of social activism or activism in general, I don't know, where do I place myself? I've been termed a socially engaged artist, also termed an environmentally engaged artist. And I think what really resonates with me is the term socially engaged artist, because I'm really interested underneath all of these environmental, personal themes. I'm really interested in how we relate to one another. I'm interested in people and interpersonal relationships. I'm interested in the psychology of self, so how the self relates to others, how we relate to the non-human or the more than human as well. So I've been exploring this through my own practice, but also through my work as half of the creative partnership called Periscope. And I can put the link into the chat box at the end. So alongside Stroud-based artist Alison Cockcroft, she and I make up Periscope. And for the last 6 or 7 years, we've been creating public spaces that are creative spaces. They're immersive, so they're a complete environment, and they're very open for anybody to enter. They defy the usual kind of definition of an art space or an art environment or workshop. So we're very careful to use a visual language that doesn't exclude people, a visual language that creates kind of openings, a very open access community space. So people can come together, they can interact with the materials that are in that space in many different ways on many different levels. At the core of what we do with Periscope is the idea of developing community and community responsibility, introducing ideas of non-hierarchical making, which is really important. So Ali and I are not the artists in the space that hold the space, we step right back. So really empowering people and empowering them in order that they can imagine something else, and that's key. So imagining a different future through all sorts of acts of autonomous creativity. This idea of imagining possible futures is really vital. So this is an image of one of the Periscope spaces. I'm really interested in the term solastalgia. So that refers to the, I suppose, the pain or the feeling of loss at our environment. And it's a fairly newly coined term. But it points really to this personal, subjective feeling, not just the action of the environment around us changing, but how it actually affects us. And I think those two levels are really important. So we have the personal and the subjective, so what we can control, our daily actions, the things that affect us directly, what's happening in the world around us, what we experience remotely through news articles, through statistics, through empathizing with other people on the other side of the world, maybe who are more affected than us. But then there's also this other level of a kind of broader philosophical discussion that could maybe be more objective. So asking what is happening socially, what is happening psychologically with humans? How do we experience what's happening to other people? How do we even talk about this? What language do we use? And I've shared with you this little sketch that I did the other day. I was actually talking to Dougal Hine with our first kind of mentor meeting, and I sketched this down. So excuse the roughness of it, but it starts off with this kind of idea of, on the surface, there's this journey, the retracing, the kind of more superficial subject of my work, the noticing the differences in the scale of the glacier and the trees. And underneath that, digging down a bit deeper, there's the bigger issues of personal loss and ecological loss, and whether the two can be explored in parallel. And then in talking especially with Elizabeth Hodson, who's the anthropologist, the difference between the subjective and the objective, art and science. Are scientists aware of their own subjectivity? Artists certainly are, very much. Looking at the hierarchies between science and art, artists are so often brought in to discuss climate change, to disseminate information, to translate it. And then asking, what do artists do with what's going on? Really, what are we doing and why? And for me, the question of exploring empathy and care is core. So last October, I took my family up to Scotland, and we took part in the first stages of the pilgrimage for COP26. And we walked from Dunbar to Edinburgh. And along the way, I wanted to talk to artists and curators and ask them what role artists play, and just get lots of different opinions. That was a personal need to work out what I'm doing. When you're engaging with really complex topics, I'm making work that's somehow about climate change. Do I need to make my work really useful? Does it need to be active and out there and changing something? Does there need to be a visible social outcome? What I do know is that artists are in a position of mediation and translation. So they occupy this amazingly privileged multi-field position. So we're permitted to inhabit the kind of in-between areas, to go between fact and fiction. We can take statistics and emotions, memory and imagination, and mix it all up. But we're also, I think, uniquely trained to read those spaces in between, to read the layers of meaning in our visual culture and our visual lives and our physical lives and the world around us physically. And to also translate the personal into the universal, the public into the intimate, and vice versa. Make the intangible tangible. And to weave all these disparate, loose threads into some kind of coherent story. We can make the abstract understandable and feelable. So we can coax the bare statistics into life, give them personality, and bring home the sometimes kind of cold or distant numbers, and make the unimaginable imaginable. Before Christmas last year, Ali from Periscope and I invited artist activists Isabel Fremeau and John Jordan to come and talk about their new book. And they came to Stroud Valley's art space. I found their approach quite dogmatic. They spoke about extractivist and activist art in a binary. So suggesting pretty strongly that any art that's not part of direct action is extractivist art and is therefore damaging in some way to the environment or useless. And in contrast to that, Dugald Hine, the Dark Mountain Project, and many other artists also working around the periphery of this subject, they present a much more nuanced approach, which resonates with me a lot more strongly. Embracing the kind of quiet, the more subtle, the private, the hopeless, some of the dreamlike states that we all enter. Dugald talked about the dark certainty of XR and said, where there's certainty, there is exclusion. And I think we need, this is me proposing, we need more not knowing. We need more of these liminal spaces, more of this openness, more storytelling. Because facts alone don't do justice to the complexity of climate change and our individual subjectivity and the mystery of the psychology of loss. An artist's job is to look past what we think is there. I recently revisited a little list of ideas by Dugald.
Sorry, Emily, just like 2 more minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah.
If that's okay.
I'll quickly go through the list from Dugald. I'll whiz through. a list to allow us to see beyond the old binary of instrumentalism versus art for art's sake. So instrumentalism, artists being used to do something, or art for art's sake, where art doesn't really do anything at all. And he says, we'll go through it quickly through these, art can hold a space in which we move from the arm's length knowledge of facts, figures and projections to the kind of knowledge that we let inside us, taking the risk it might change us. Art can give us just enough beauty to stay with the darkness rather than flee or shut down. Like the bronze shield given to Perseus by Athena, art and its indirect ways of knowing can allow us to approach realities which, if looked at directly, turn something inside us to stone. Art can teach us to live with uncertainty, to let go of our dreams of control. Art can call us back from strategic calculations about which message will play best with which target group, insisting on the tricky need for honesty. So these grey areas, the unknown, lead us into a state of openness, and leads me on to talk about empathy. So empathy is the capacity to feel what you literally do not feel. It's a work of imagination and memory. And it depends on accessing potentially quite difficult memories and feelings in order to empathise with somebody else. So more than ever, we need to access empathy for other people, for other environments, for the more than human. I'm just cutting down what I was going to say a little bit. I'm talking a little bit around comfort and comfort in our lives as a barrier for empathy. So discomfort and challenging people to engage in potentially uncomfortable actions has been something that's been core to my practice and will, I'm sure, inform the next body of work that I'm starting. So asking people to engage in slightly uncomfortable, challenging physical making actions through collaborative drawing actions. And you can see some of the images from previous projects, sharing a viewpoint, attempting to draw the same object from the same place. So conversations of whether you can share a viewpoint with somebody else, points of view, your different physicality, how you see the world. So a lot of my work has been looking around that area, gently asking people to engage in these quite complex and quite challenging actions through drawing conversations, through making together. And these triggered conversations about shared space, about shared views, how we work with each other, how we respect each other. And they're uncomfortable. So just trying to tie that all up a little bit, Rebecca Solnit writes about pain and physical boundaries and empathy, and so discomfort and how that opens us up to feeling empathy. So she writes that pain defines the physical boundaries of the self, but these identifications, so empathy, care, taking into oneself, to feel into something else, these define a much larger self, larger than the boundaries of your physical self. And the limits of this psychic self are nothing more or less than the limits of love. And I suggest that without these acts of discomfort, without feeling fear, afraid, hopeless, without challenging our comfortable viewpoint or our comfortable lives, we don't truly feel, and we lose the ability to feel into other people, into other environments. And we have to go to uncomfortable places in order to share and connect and feel. And returning to Dougal's list of what art can do, just to sum up, art can give us just enough beauty to stay with that darkness rather than fleeing or shutting down. Thank you.
Really beautiful words. Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing that with us and for sharing your art with us and for also sharing some like beautiful examples of what other people have made as well. I mean, so many of these things, like we always get with cloud cafes, there's like threads that run through. I thought it was really interesting what you said around like loss, and how, I mean, personal loss is something that every single person in this world goes through, and that might be something that therefore connects us with ecological loss, because it's something that everyone is going to be going through the same. This connection and relationship between science and art, I think, is also a really important question, and something that we can look at much more this sense of community responsibility, empowering, the collective visions of utopia. I've wrote so many notes down when you were speaking. It was wonderful. But I think right at the end there, what you were saying around the need for us to become uncomfortable, I think that is important, not just when looking at the ecological collapse and climate justice, but also when looking at social justice, which I think for me is something that is right there along with climate justice. You can't have one without the other. And I think that from the positions of comfort or privilege that we find ourselves in, we have to step into a world of discomfort in order to truly empathize with people and places and things. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts as well. It was really, really beautiful. I know that this seems like we could talk forever on this subject. There's even all the three that we've had so far have been so very different and from a different perspective, which I think has been wonderful as well. So now I'll move us on to our final presenter for the evening, who I don't even know if I need to introduce, because I think the name carries so much by itself. But this is TWEEDY the Clown, an infamous entertainer in Stroud and very far beyond, from both Gifford Circus and theatre, who has many, circus skills, musical instruments, magic, all of the wonderful performative arts that we see and love. So thank you so much for joining us. Please tell us about yourself and your art and your love for art in action. Thank you so much, TWEEDY.
Thank you for inviting me here this evening. Obviously, what I'm doing at the moment actually has nothing to do with social change or the environment. If anything, it's the opposite. It's kind of escapism for a couple of hours. But I'd like to talk about clown in general, because that's what I am and that's what I'm passionate about. And firstly, like the word clown, it's lost its original meaning. It kind of has different connotations for different people. The media's kind of reduced the word clown as a way to describe politicians or worse, monsters for horror movies, which it's really kind of frustrating, because there's a beautiful word clown, and clown's a beautiful thing. It's the opposite from politicians or monsters. It's kind of an innocent, naive, child-like character who brings joy and warmth and touches the heart through laughter. So that's why I still call myself a clown. A lot of people kind of, who essentially are clowns, won't call themselves clowns anymore. They'll call themselves a fool or an eccentric or a physical comedian or something like that. But I call myself a clown because that's what I am, and I'm trying to kind of claim the word back again. Hopefully it's kind of working, because there's a lot of kids growing up watching me who are now adults, because I'm getting quite old. So to them, when you say the word clown, hopefully they think, oh, TWEEDY, he's a clown, and it will mean that instead of a politician, because it's quite dangerous kind of calling politicians clowns, because it makes out that they're a bit harmless, when in reality they're not at all. So anyway, as a clown, as a good clown, you need to be able to connect with the audience. You need to have a character that has empathy, so the audience kind of cares about the character, and likes the character. Otherwise, they're never going to find him funny. When I kind of started clowning in the 90s, Patch Adams came out, the movie with Robin Williams, about the real life guy who would go into hospitals and try to start his own hospital, and kind of challenged all the medics about curing the patient, not the disease. And he did clowning in the hospitals, and that inspired me at the time to start going into hospitals. And I helped set up a company called Laughter Care after meeting Patch briefly. He was doing a sort of talk at Earl's Court, and because I really wanted to meet him, I went to his talk in full clown get-up. At the time when I first started, I used to wear the full-on red nose and makeup and sort of big shoes and all that sort of thing. So I really stood out at his talk and did get to meet him and had an interesting chat. And that's when I helped set up this laughter care, because the circus I was with at the time would tour big cities opposed to Giffords, who does little things. So every week when we'd arrive in the new city, we'd visit that hospital. I had a tagline for it that later realised didn't work. It was called "Dedicating to Putting Clowns in Hospital," which somebody pointed out it sounded like we were beating clowns up and putting them in hospital. So that was kind of very interesting, because clowning in a hospital is obviously very different, and kind of first going into a ward and meeting a sick kid, it's not instantly about going in and being crazy and trying to make them laugh. It's about making that connection with the patient. And it's all about that connection, having that connection with people. Before the circus starts, I'll normally go round at the start and kind of high-five people, and this is pre-pandemic. I'm not allowed to do that, obviously, during the pandemic. And I really miss kind of having that interaction and connection. So that's what it's about, and that's what I do as we go into hospital. First get that connection and then move from there. And I think it's that kind of connection and empathetic character that makes clowns so good at lifting spirits in difficult situations. Clowns are kind of everywhere. They're at hospitals, they're at refugee camps, any kind of humanitarian crisis, there'll be clowns there. I mean, Patch Adams is fantastic in kind of just going into war zones with a load of clowns and, you know, lifting people's spirits, because you need it, especially in these kind of circumstances. And I did kind of think, well, why is it clown that kind of works so well? Because it's, when you clown in hospital, it's not just about entertaining the kids. You know, we'll go into the adult wards as well and things like that. And I saw this episode of Seinfeld where he was kind of trying to do stand up in a hospital, and he just couldn't do it. And similarly, the ventriloquist Nina Conti, who's amazing, she's hilarious. There was a TV program where she tried to become a hospital clown at Great Ormond Street, and she found it extremely difficult to kind of make that connection. And I think it's because it's about the openness and the kind of truthfulness of the clown that you need to have. You need to kind of be able to stand there and bare your soul to all. Yes. And there's something kind of quite spiritual about clowns, and a lot of clowning kind of did start with spirituality. There's a famous Native American, let's me think, Lame Deer, that was it, that was his name. He said, "To us a clown is somebody sacred, funny, powerful, ridiculous, holy, shameful, visionary. Fooling around, a clown is really performing a spiritual ceremony," which I think is great. Kind of being in a clown state, it's very much about being in the moment. And there's a radio documentary by Stuart Lee about the Pablo clowns. I might have pronounced that wrong, but it's kind of Native American clowns. They're very famous. Who do this ritual, and I think they kind of still do, but it's probably for tourists, really. And also my late friend, Reverend Rowley Bain, he used to clown, spread the message of Jesus. So it's a great way to get a message across through clowning. Clowns, they've always kind of flaunted the rules of society, broke rules. They're kind of both innocent and dangerous at the same time. They make rules more visible, and then they can point out how ridiculous they are. And that's kind of how clowning can be great for social change, because, you know, if people warm to you, and they're more likely to listen to what you say. You know, it's all about love, not about hate. A good clown, as I said, has the ability to touch the heart, by being open, truthful, and having that connection. And then, of course, by being able to make people laugh as well, which is a great way to kind of diffuse situations, which is, you know, as I mentioned before, Patch Adams being in that sort of war zones, he comes under all sorts of dangerous situations where you have to change it. And that's why it's a great way to motivate people, get messages across. And I think so many people could benefit from the way of the clown. There's actually loads of clowns in Stroud, and I don't mean that in the oh, stop clowning around, or, you know, oh, he's a clown. Genuinely, there are lots of clowns in Stroud, people who have learned the way of clown through schools and workshops. And that's one of the reasons I love it here in Stroud. There's so many creative people, and of course creativity creates creativity, and being surrounded by so much of it is great. And also being surrounded by so much nature, I find very inspiring as well. It's good for the soul that you could just be minutes away from being at the top of a hill with so much great views and beauty. So everyone could benefit from living in Stroud and being a clown. That's what I think. Social change first comes from changing yourself with a compassionate heart. Reach the soul, not the protest. I can't remember the full kind of quote. That's a Ramdas quote, I think. Because clowning is about kind of being in the now, being here. So yeah, I'm very passionate about clowning, and when I have some time, because I'm very busy with the circus and things like that, maybe I shall turn my clowning towards more of these things. I think that's about it for me. Thank you all for listening. Oh, I didn't look at in case there's any questions. Clowns get away with stuff other people can't. Yes, which is great.
Thank you so much, Tweedy. Thank you. Honestly, that was wonderful, and you had me giggling the whole way through. So there you go. I mean, so many of, yeah, absolutely. You'll have to watch the video back and see me. But it was, I think, so many things resonated that you said. Right at the beginning, you said you're not doing anything about protests or activism at the minute, and then you went on to say around escapism. And I think for me, like, happiness is the biggest protest that an individual can take part in. Being happy means that you have less reliance on buying things and doing things that you don't need, because you know you have everything that you need from being happy and healthy. So I think, like, happiness is definitely the biggest protest, and I think that what you do is feeding happiness, which is a beautiful thing.
Thank you. I just saw Stella Park.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry. No, I just saw Stella Park's question: would Gifford or Tweedy consider doing an environmental themed show to help improve understanding of the challenges we face? It is something that I have been looking into. So yes.
Amazing news. Amazing news.
Not because I'm very busy, but it's something that I have been kind of thinking about and looking into. So yes.
Fantastic. Well, we know someone who plays music and writes scores, and we know lots of people who are obviously in the art and environment scene who I'm sure we can connect you with after this. But thank you so much for taking us through your presentation and speaking to us a bit. I think you know, from these 4 amazing speakers that we've had, there's been so many key themes that going through around storytelling and creating a narrative that people can connect with, and how basically if you talk about something or do something with passion, then people will listen to you. And I think that that's, people find a passion that they can connect with, be it music or art, and then to use that to make social change or make environmental change or make the world better is a beautiful thing to do it with. Okay, so I have been so enthralled in the conversations that I haven't been watching the chat as well as I should, so apologies there. I'm just scrolling through now to see if I can find any more questions from the beginning. So there's a lot of around Atelier right at the beginning. The Musical Activist podcast, we know, is Sarah NICOLLS' podcast that everybody should take a look at.
Is it interesting to ask the people listening, like, what art has moved them, or do you know what I mean? Like, to throw the question back.
Absolutely. So what art has moved you? If you are watching and would like to share with us, then please pop it in the chat, or if you can we raise hands on here? And then, yeah, please raise your hand if you want to speak on that question from Sarah, which is great. I'm going to keep go. Oh, Kath. Okay. Oh, that's Katharina. No? Okay. So many names. Okay, tell me, Katharina, thanks.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Sarah. Yeah, and I'm not going to mention anything about craft, but I am going to mention a project we have talked about in some other sessions. One of them called the Bank Job, and another project that the same artist group are running right now called Power, I think. And they work a lot with local community. They're based in London. It's Daniel Edel, I'm bad with names, but it's a artist duo that are working very much with community projects, but also with this idea of provoking projects that basically provoke into action. One of the projects they did about the Bank Job was that they crowdfunded by creating lots of different art artifacts and their own money. And by the money they got, they bought debt. You can buy debt really cheap. That's worth a lot of money. And then they blew up the debt, the paperwork that was the debt. And then they wrote to all the people who had the debt and said, you don't have debt anymore. And I think it's been done many times in art history, but I really like these kind of projects. They really sort of speak to me and makes me sort of try to understand the difficult nature of the economical world, the finance world. And so, yeah, and now they're doing a project around community energy. So they're trying to have a street in London where they're trying to create solar panels to power the whole neighborhood from that one street. But they're approaching it from quite a different angle than probably a normal community group would do it. And they probably also shout about it in slightly different ways. So I get very inspired by those type of projects.
Amazing, thanks for sharing, Kath. I think, I mean, there's so many wonderful projects like that, and I think you're right. I think art looks like so many different things, and for some people that is exactly what it is. Okay, do we have anyone else who would like to share with us what inspires them?
Norman's written a question as well.
Oh, sorry, have I missed it?
It's
Norman
popped up.
Oh, okay. Norman, if you can unmute to ask your question, that would be great. Thank you.
Well, hi. When I hear or see the conventional art world, the leading lights, the cognoscenti, seem to talk in an exclusive kind of language, which isn't really accessible. And so, in terms of art in action, to what extent do you think that artists need to talk in a more straightforward, easily accessible language? I don't know if I'm putting my thoughts across clearly, but hopefully you get the gist of it.
I think it's a very clear question. I feel like there's also a total range of answers, isn't there? Because the fact is, art shouldn't be one thing, and that would be awful if it was. Like, so actually, it's great that there's some really straightforward art that you cannot, that's unambiguous. And certainly I enjoyed being fairly direct in 12 years, but wouldn't it be a shame if we lost things which are much more esoteric and mystical and nuanced, so that'd be my answer. What do you think, Emily? I saw you nodding there.
Just unmute myself. Yes, I was thinking back to what I touched on, that artists aren't there to convey a message. They're not there to do a job for scientists or to make anything clear necessarily. And I agree with you, Sarah, that wouldn't it be a shame if we lost all the nuance and all the different layers of ways of communicating? I was going to ask you, sorry, who asked the question? Was it Norman? Yeah. What do you mean by language? Do you mean the actual the language by which the artwork is described, or is it the language of the art itself? The actual way the artwork is made, because they're two very different things. And I think certainly the language used to describe art can be really really exclusive and not open access at all. But if you're talking about the actual material and the way art is made, then I think, going back to what Sarah said, this nuance and layers and different ways of expressing things and things not being clear and things not being easily readable is really important to keep the mystery, and also the not making something clear. Art isn't supposed to be clear and readable like a set of instructions. It's supposed to inspire very different things in different people. Yeah, that's my take on that.
Thanks, Emily. Oh, sorry, Norman. No, come back in.
Yeah. Nobody, I think, will remember Bertrand Russell, a philosopher who's dead. But what sticks in my mind is what he said at one point about conveying knowledge, whether it was philosophy or science or art, I suspect, that there's no reason why the person who's trying to explain things can't do it in language that many people can understand. I'm not suggesting that everything should be populist and at the lowest common denominator, but that we all, artists and us all, need to be aware of how to speak in a more accessible way.
Thanks, Norman. I don't know if TWEEDY or Katharina wanted to come in on this conversation around language and accessibility and making it something that everyone can connect with. Give us a hand up if you do, but no problem if you don't. I mean, we have the same problem in environment and we have the same problem in politics. Finding a way that is accessible to everybody is difficult, but I think it's, something that, a narrative that needs to be created and storytelling that needs to continue. Okay, Phil has got his hand up, I can see. So I'm gonna bring Phil in, and then we've had a question from Lynn in the chat as well. Thank you, Norman, for the question there.
Okay, I've got an answer to the question a minute ago, and that's that language that I read when I'm looking at art. That language, I really like it. I just wish I could do it. I can't do it. I can't use that language, but I like it. But the point I wanted to make, and it's what inspires me, I've got a really, really friendly looking polar bear costume, which is perfect for demonstrations. So any whiff of an environmental demonstration, march, action, photo shoot, I'm like, oh, can I get the polar bear costume out? And I want to know from the speakers, have they got any examples of how their art can make them feel inspired to, take some of the actions that, the environment crisis needs us to take, like, for example, going on demos, writing to MPs, things like that.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, just either unmute yourself or hands up if you'd like to.
Sorry, just to understand the question, how our art makes us more likely to do one of those things, or whether we do those things as well.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, interesting question. Because I sort of feel like, in a way, for me personally, like doing those things and those things seemingly never making any difference was kind of what propelled me to make some art about it, because I sort of thought maybe this is going to have more impact, so it was almost the other way around. It was like, oh, I've been on all these demos and written all these letters and signed all these petitions, what else can I do? So it was sort of that way around. Yeah,
the chicken or the egg. What came first, the protest or the art? Okay. Anybody else would like to come back on Phil's question? If not, I will bring Lynn in. Oh, Katharina, and then Emily.
No, I just want a very quick comment. I also was just confirm what Sarah said. I think they go hand in hand, and I think some of the things we are doing is a protest or is a campaign in its own right, but they might support those more classic methods.
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, my thoughts are kind of wandering, but I think one thing I'd like to add is that there's also other levels of engaging with activism and exploring people's the underlying drive that people have to do certain things. So I think maybe that's where I'm coming in with some of the research and some of my practice. It's a kind of underneath layer of, okay, so I'm not going to talk directly about climate change, I'm not going to talk about activism, and I'm not going to expect anything of you, but I just want to open a little window in terms of some of the things that we are so badly lacking, which are impacting on the world around us, which is, we touched on empathy, but also autonomy. You know, gently encouraging people to believe that they have some power to change things. So almost going underneath, rather than just saying, well, you shouldn't drive as much, or you shouldn't eat so much meat, or maybe come on this protest, which can be quite big, difficult steps for people. Or maybe, as other people have said, Katharina or Sarah, you just said that it seems like it doesn't have that much impact. Just going gently underneath and saying, well, you do have the power in your life to change your local environment. And I think that's just as important. It's a kind of quiet little underlying river of action, which isn't that visible.
Okay, amazing. Thanks for your comments, and Phil, thanks for your question, as always. An interesting one. Just any of the speakers, put your hands up if you want to say something, okay? Because otherwise I'm going to go and find, I think it was Lynn we had a question from. Lynn, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny, and thanks for all the speakers. I sort of addressed this to TWEEDY a bit, but I think it's to everybody, because I think that the messaging, we try to change politicians' minds, and our messaging is not affecting them. And I think we need to speak to a broader audience. And I'm wondering if we should be using more humor, more different kinds of tactics to reach people and really point out the absurdity, the absolute absurdity of the lines that our politicians take and that corporations take, not only with the climate crisis, but with all kinds of issues.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. So I guess it was sort of for TWEEDY, so if we go to TWEEDY first.
I just unmute myself. Yeah, no, it would be good. The problem with it is it's very difficult to get it right. You know, if you see a bunch of people might think, let's kind of go in front of Parliament and do a bit of a clown show as an environmental thing, but as I was saying earlier about that connection, if you don't have that connection to everyone just sort of there, they're going to go, what are these weird people doing? You know, it just would look a mess. So it's kind of, it could be, but it's a difficult thing to get that balance right, and kind of just so that, yeah, you engage people and they don't just kind of think a bunch of weirdos, what are they doing? So again, it's going back to connection, and if you can get it right, it could be brilliant, but it'd be very difficult. Thank you.
Thanks, TWEEDY. I don't know if anyone else, Sarah? Yeah.
Well, I just think like humor is such a brilliant tool, and I definitely enjoy like weaving. I mean, I didn't play those bits to you, but there's quite silly bits in the 12 years where, because it's basically phone calls, most of it is phone calls between these sisters that are made up, and you know, they are quite silly. They are meant to make you giggle, and I just feel like, you know, having people a bit warmed up, frankly, is quite a good state to be in, to then like chuck some other stuff at them. So, but yeah, also because like you've got a certain amount of time so you can go through different states. That was a thing that I found quite pleasing about making a 1 hour work, because you could actually go to all the different places. You can go to the absurdity, but then you can also go to the darkness that Emily was talking about a lot with Dougal's stuff. But yeah, sorry, I've lost the question now. Carry on.
I think that is completely right, but it's getting politicians to watch the humour in the first place is where part of the problem is.
Actually, I was thinking about
To
Led
get
by
an
Donkeys.
audience with them, it'd be great.
Led by Donkeys was pretty good with that supersized tweet that they like carried over thousands of people. That was pretty great. But yeah, I mean, I'm quite interested to know what people think about Don't Look Up, because that's satire in, you know, for climate change, and I feel like most of the critics seem to absolutely hate it, and all the people that I know loved it, and I sort of feel like, oh no, was it something that just missed the target, like, you know, in terms of making a broader audience? Did it bring people in, or was it just people that were already quite aware, thought it was hilarious, and sort of, yeah, I'm interested to ask people about that.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think Katharina had a hand up to answer the previous question, but then I think that's also an interesting point for us to end on, maybe the Don't Look Up. So Katharina, if you had a comment on Lynn's question, and then we'll
Yeah,
go back to
I think
Sarah.
I can make it sort of relevant for the Don't Look Up as well, and the comedy in that film, which I kind of enjoyed. I think there's two types of sort of comedy or satire, and it's sort of, there's one where you laugh you laugh at somebody else because you think they're ridiculous, and I think that's lovely because we feel like we are together in this mess, and that can somehow give some kind of community. But then what I think we should aspire to do is to create comedy where we laugh at ourselves, and in some ways it's so bloody banal, but I think that's where we need to move to, because it's the uncomfortable thing that Emily also talked about, where I think satire and comedy can take us, but it's just such a difficult tool to use in the right way, where you don't push people away instead. But I also like the donkey one. And I think the coming back to Don't Look Up, I think they do it to a certain extent, but I think it has a very big audience, and for that in its own right, I think it's probably a good idea that it came out.
Okay, thank you, and thanks, Lynn, for your question as well. I think we've got 3 minutes left before the end of the session. So I usually like to ask each speaker to sort of give us one comment, you know, very short, your final sentence. What do you want people to take home? Is there a call to action? What's the one thing that you want them to tell the person that didn't make it to this session? What should they tell them from you? I mean, there's people answering your question in the chat, Sarah, around Don't Look Up. A real conversation starter, satire can backfire. It made someone depressed. Barbara, I hope you're all right now. But I think for me, it's happening in popular culture. That's the most important thing. It's gone out of the obscure, and it is going head on into the popular culture, and that's what's important. However good or bad it landed, I think it's there, and so there's no, what do they say, no press is bad press or something. So hopefully it got people talking. But okay, let's do one final comment from each of our speakers, and then we will let people go and eat and talk about this wonderful session that we've had. Okay, who would like to go first? Anybody? Okay, don't all come at once.
Okay, I'll go.
Emily. Oh, Tweedy. Okay, Tweedy. Let's go Tweedy, then Emily. Let's go Tweedy, then Emily. All right.
Okay. If a tree falls in the forest when nobody's around, do all the other trees point and laugh at it? Sorry, I had to finish with a gag.
That was wonderful. There you go. That's it. We should stop now. No, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Emily, give us your final comments, and also everybody in the audience, feel free to turn your cameras back on and so they can see you laughing and smiling. Emily,
just gonna bring it right down from that. I was thinking of staying with not knowing and with not understanding, and not understanding the language, and stay with the openness of that.
amazing, thank you. Okay, Katharina, we'll come to you next.
Well, the last comment, it was very difficult. There's so many things to say. I mean, do something local, do something with your hands. If not, put them in the soil and see what that feels like.
Amazing. Okay, Sarah.
Well, I was sort of thinking, like, be kind to artists. We don't necessarily have the answers, but we're just trying to probe things, and it might be messy and unfinished and create more questions, but hopefully something that we're throwing out is going to agitate in a useful way. So yeah, don't expect perfection. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, as always, to everybody who joins us for the Cloud Cafes. This has possibly been one of my favorites, I think. I know they're always thought-provoking, but this one has made me smile and has made me think, and it's been a beautiful collective of perspectives from all different angles, music, performance, making, putting your hands in the soil, art. It's been wonderful, and we really appreciate the speakers giving us their time, the organizers giving their time as well, and as ever, you all come in to join us, which we always appreciate. I think just do something, I think, is the key theme. Do something. Art isn't perfect, so that thing that you've always thought, maybe I should, or maybe I shouldn't, or maybe I will, or maybe I won't, just do it. Like, the world is burning, so you might not get a chance for much longer. Art is, truly wonderful and can take complex issues that none of us understand and put it in a way that we can connect with on a daily basis, or that we can try and understand in a more meaningful way. And I think, storytelling, the openness of language. But like, if the language is too difficult, then go and see, a clown, or go and listen to some music, because I think it's, there's always things that are difficult for us to connect with, but that's why there's so many options. That's why art is beautiful, because it's everything. Everything is art. So thank you so much. Just, do the protest thing, be happy everybody, and have a wonderful 2022, and it's just going to get better and better, I'm sure. So join us for the next session, and thank you for having me, and thank you to Stroud District Green Party who organise all of these, and especially to Elizabeth for this one. A fantastic idea. And yeah, please turn your cameras on and give us a wave, and we will see you all soon, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the artists. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Really wonderful.